A parliament is a mechanical processing machine. It takes voter ballots as input and produces laws as output. When we evaluate this machine strictly on its math, we find a severe mechanical flaw, the 51% dictatorship. This visualization shows how the threshold mechanic operates. A parliament is divided into a blue faction holding 51% of the seats and a yellow faction holding 49%. Because a standard bill requires only a simple majority to pass, that 51% blue segment lights up and successfully stamps every single piece of legislation it wants. When the 49% yellow minority attempts to pass their own initiatives, they are instantly overwritten by the blue majority. Their legislative input is rejected and swept off the board entirely. In real governance, this threshold means nearly half the population is completely locked out of the legislative output. We assume electing a representative guarantees an equal voice. The math of a winner-take-all floor vote proves otherwise. If the final legislative output does not directly mirror the electoral input, true proportional representation is an illusion. To engineer a functional democracy, we must establish an undeniable mathematical baseline before drawing maps or seating politicians. This baseline is Axiom 4. Democracy must allow every individual to participate in exact proportion to their presence in society. This chart compares the traditional model with the Axiom 4 constraint. On the left, in the old system, a 51% electoral input yields 100% of the legislative output. On the right, under Axiom 4, a 51% input strictly limits that faction to passing exactly 51% of the laws. This exact mathematical translation applies to the minority as well. A demographic making up 5% of the electorate draws a direct, level line to exactly 5% of the legislative output. Protecting a 5% micro-minority is the ultimate stress test. If they are guaranteed exact power, it works for everyone. Traditional voting systems, whether proportional or majority-based, possess no mechanical way to enforce this outcome on the assembly floor. Fixing democracy requires engineering a system that mathematically forces the output to match the input, ensuring Axiom 4 is an unavoidable physical rule. The first major mechanical vulnerability in the democratic machine is geographic districting. Where the lines are drawn determines who holds power. This manipulation is entirely dependent on a single underlying rule. The winner of a district takes all the representation, and one representative equals exactly one legislative vote. This diagram shows a baseline grid of 50 precincts. Before any borders are drawn, the raw voter distribution is clear: 60% yellow voters and 40% green. This graphic shows cracking. Horizontal lines distribute the 60-40 split, so the yellow majority narrowly wins all 5 districts. The opposite is packing. Jagged boundaries force the yellow majority into dense districts, allowing the green minority to win 3 of 5 seats. This diagram shows a proportionate outcome. By drawing vertical lines that group the voters evenly, the map yields a 3-2 district split. This exactly matches the actual 60-40 demographic reality. Because the lines dictate the outcome, political factions spend immense resources in constant warfare to redraw, defend, and police these boundaries. As long as every representative holds equal, interchangeable voting power inside the assembly, the map will always remain a weapon used to distort voter intent. The engineering solution to this vulnerability is counterintuitive. Instead of fighting over how to draw perfect maps, we alter the internal power of the representatives themselves. This concept is known as weighted legislative voting. A representative votes using their precise net numerical score from citizens. This replaces the single proxy vote. You no longer have 250 identical votes. Representatives wield wildly different mathematical weights. One might hold 3,400 votes, another 89,210. This map illustrates how this weighted concept responds to a real-world geographic framework. Look at this wireframe of Serbia, overlaid with abstract, highly disproportionate district shapes designed to represent severe gerrymandering. Consider how this system processes a district intentionally drawn to be massive, designed to trap and dilute a specific demographic. The inflated population size of that trapped district simply converts directly into a massive voting weight for that single representative. The manipulation of borders is instantly neutralized. District size disparities self-correct because the representative's voting power scales perfectly with the trapped population. Weighted legislative voting deletes the geometry of gerrymandering. It turns the assembly into an exact one-to-one numerical mirror of the electorate. With the geographic map neutralized, the architecture must now address the floor of the assembly, fixing exactly how Parliament processes legislation. The solution is a procedure called block voting. In block voting, instead of passing laws one by one, the Assembly votes on large batches simultaneously, say 100 items. Alongside these items are 4 factions with voting power energy bars: blue 50%, yellow 30%, green 15%, and red 5%. To prevent the 50% majority from sweeping the board, the system introduces a critical mechanical failsafe, the depletion rule. This rule dictates that voting power is spent, not infinite. The blue faction uses its 50% power bar to stamp and pass a single legislative rectangle. Instantly, the blue energy bar drops significantly, and their nodes gray out. The majority's voting power is temporarily suspended and heavily depleted. They cannot participate at full strength for the subsequent items in that block. This creates a strategic forced choice. A majority faction cannot brute force every law through the chamber. They must strictly ration their votes for their absolute highest priorities. By treating voting power as a finite, depleting resource, the system mathematically shatters the 51% dictatorship. While the dominant majority is in a depleted state, the smaller minority factions finally have an opening. Log rolling is a specifically engineered, systemic feature. It moves the practice of pooling votes out of DAC rooms and into the architecture of the assembly. Smaller factions can pool intact votes. The green and red bars physically merge, pushing past the grayed-out blue faction to pass a law. Once used, this combined bar depletes and grays out. Now, the untouched yellow faction steps up as the dominant remaining power. This forces a continuous, self-correcting cycle over the course of voting on the entire 100-item block. The temporary suspension of power creates an automatic rotational equity. Every faction gets a turn until their power is spent. Over a legislative session, victories exactly match the demographic percentages of the electorate. A 3% minority secures exactly 3% of the laws. Block voting and weighted power strip the winner-take-all mechanics out of governance. They transform democracy into an exact mathematical distribution of citizen intent.